Alright, so we'll kick off. I'd just like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone here today, and especially Andy Shenk, the CEO of Uni Services. I just thought I'd give you a bit of background and context for us inviting Andy here today. The business growth agenda identified knowledge exchange between public research institutions, and particularly higher education and businesses, as a key opportunity for New Zealand to continue to build innovation in New Zealand. Because in New Zealand, the public research institutions do comparably high amount of research than their counterparts in other OECD countries. So that makes them an important source of knowledge for New Zealand businesses. And while we were drafting the business growth agenda, the Minister prompted us to include Uni Services as an example of where knowledge exchange is working well within an organisation and businesses. So welcome Andy, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. I should say, in case any of you were here, about 3+ weeks ago, I was asked to give a presentation on this topic to David Small and his team for their strategy day, which I did. So if you were here, much of what I'm going to say is a repeat of that, because they didn't sort of chase me out of the room when I talked about those concepts. But I've added some things and some thinking, in part reflecting on the true partnership that we see that we have with NBIE. We have a couple of key programs that contribute greatly to our ability to carry out our mission of commercializing intellectual property from the university, and those are supported by the ministry, and we're very happy to continue being the ministry's partner. I know not everybody here is from the ministry, but I wanted to acknowledge that NBIE is a significant partner for us in what we do. What I'm going to be talking about today is my definition of innovation. Innovation gets used very broadly and sometimes not very in a way that's not very well defined across New Zealand and in many places in the world. So I have a particular definition about what I mean about innovation. And I'm going to be talking in general terms about the ways that I see that innovation can contribute to society as well as to our economy. And I've got a couple of examples, one a business-focused example and one a more of a societal-focused example to help illustrate that. So let's kick off a bit with who we are. Uni Services is a wholly owned subsidiary of the University of Auckland. We are established as a company under the Companies Act. I report to a board of directors, which happens to be chaired by our Vice Chancellor. We act as a conduit between the outside world and their needs and interests, be they society, be they ministries of the Crown, be they private companies, and the academic expertise and thought leadership and capabilities of the university. At our university, all of the public good research activities are managed by the university's research office, and that is not us. All of the commercial relationships, all of the contract education opportunities, all of the commercially sponsored research, and all the commercialization of intellectual property is us. So one of our largest clients in the way that we see it is actually the New Zealand government, because the government spends on service provision in the community, and we provide some of that in the forms of the Immunization Advisory Center and other things that we provide for our public health capabilities. The government also invests quite extensively in research to inform policy. Help us understand whether this approach to a societal or public health or other issue is better than that approach. How would we evaluate that? Here's a body of research we would like you to do. That work goes through Uni Services at Auckland. So as I've shown here, we span a very wide range of offerings, our research, education programs, as well as IP commercialization and investment. Just a few numbers to give you some sense of scale. Last year, we had about $130 million worth of revenues. We received just over $1 million from MBIE to support our commercialization program, which is called Return on Science. And we have about $1 million of devolved pre-seed accelerator funding, which we use alongside our own to pay for the development, protection and development of intellectual property. All of the rest of our $130 million comes from our business activities. We don't receive any central budget allocation from our university. We are not a cost center. All of the rest of that is money that we've made by establishing valuable relationships with outside parties. So over the last 10 years, it's added up to about $1 billion. So we're quite substantial in the amount of effort that we put into this. You can see the other things that we do. I wanted to mention, in particular for this presentation, our activity in the patent area, because we're responsible for about 50% of all the patents issued to universities and CRIs in the country. And if we look at all research organizations, including private research organizations, we're between 30 and 40%. So we're very, very active in establishing opportunities to capture value from intellectual property created by our university. So my aim in this talk is to share with you my views about how innovation can contribute to our economy and our society, but first some definitions and some trends. This is where I started off saying the definition of innovation is often very broad or sometimes is indistinct. Some people use it when they're really talking about research. Others use it when they're talking about R&D or other things. For me, innovation is doing something new that has a demonstrable benefit. So in your research, you can do something new. In fact, you do something new every day, typically. It may or may not have any outcomes that anybody can measure, right? Whereas if you do something new and a patient gets better, or a treatment is more effective, or a student learns more than they would have learned otherwise, or something else, that's an innovation in my opinion. It is often tied to intellectual property development and research, new technologies and so forth, but it doesn't have to be. There are seats up here. One each. But it doesn't have to be. In my former life, I was the chief scientist at Fonterra, and we ran an annual prize competition every year to recognize significant innovations in the company. One of the biggest was a change in the way we managed working capital, in the way that we paid the shareholder farmers. It added more than $20 million a year to the bottom line, because some smart people thought about the way we handled our treasury calls from the bank and overnight rates and all manner of things, and they added a huge amount of value. That was an innovation. It was a fantastic innovation. It didn't require a bunch of boffins in labs, I'm one of those so I can use the pejorative, to do something with chemistry or engineering or something. But it was still an innovation. It was hugely valuable and important to do. So I've got a very broad definition, but it's all down here at this implementation, making a difference to business or society. For me, that's an innovation. All of this spectrum is underpinned by talent. It takes clever, creative people to do the best quality R&D. It takes clever and different people sometimes to make the best out of innovation, because the ask is different, what you have to accomplish is different, the contribution you make is different. And if we're thinking holistically about our system in New Zealand and how robust it is and what it's able to deliver, we need to be thinking about the bits across the top, but crucially, we have to be thinking about the people as well. And I'll mention the contribution that different skill sets contribute a bit later. So, what do we think about the contribution of innovation to society? I'm going to show a few figures, and my skills with PowerPoint were such that I struggled to get all the legends on. So, please just try to remember value goes up and down, and these are just made up business sectors along the bottom. Some are very valuable, some contribute a lot to the economy, some not so much. I would describe a pattern like this as a low diversity, low resilience economy. There are not very many sectors, and most of them are small. A couple are large. An economy with features like this that also has interdependency between those large ones has very low resilience. Okay? Just imagine that this is dairy and this is tourism. Let's further imagine we had a serious biosecurity event that resulted in heaps of cow carcasses being burned, like the foot and mouth images from Europe. That would potentially significantly affect tourism. Right? So that's an example, a real life example in my opinion, of a place where an economy might potentially be exposed because it's not very diverse and because it has, as a result, it has low resilience. What you want is a high diversity, robust economy, more like this. And innovation can add by helping sectors grow and helping new sectors arise that don't exist today if we use it well, through our policy interventions, through our openness for new things, through our investment. So that I would describe as an expanding, vibrant economy with a high degree of resilience. Many of those sectors are contributing substantially to the overall economy. I think that's where we want to be in the future. So, I've already prefigured the question, what sort of economy do we want? Right? How do we get there? At its core, what I'm talking about is focusing on creating sustainable competitive advantage in the sectors we have today and in new sectors that don't exist today. It's much, much easier, and much of our current policy is focused on adding value to our current sectors. Perfectly good idea to do. But I think, for me personally, it isn't enough. I think we need to be open to new sectors as well. What I've already talked about applies equally well, in my opinion, to our thinking about what sort of society we want. Do we want a society where real benefits are derived from change and from new programs that we implement? Where we recognize it's always possible that there's a better idea, there's a better way to do things than perhaps the way we do today. And that some of the same drivers about being open to change, about taking risks on new areas, on evaluating whether you have real sustainable advantage from one approach or another, those things still apply when we think about societal benefits as well. And as I said at the beginning, I have a commercial example I'm going to show you and a societal benefit example. So let's move on and think a bit about how we compare as a nation on some measures of innovation. And I apologize that not all of the things that I'm going to show you here actually follow my definition, but I've used somebody else's data and analyzed it. So some things are actually R&D in here, but I'm going to still try to link it to an innovation story. INSEAD, Cornell University, and the World Intellectual Property Organization do an annual survey of R&D and innovation competitiveness around the world. I took the 2013 data and did some thinking about what I thought it showed. So it compares countries on these 90 measures. New Zealand's rank is 17th, where 1 is good, by the way. And that's really pretty good. Our political environment, we're ranked 14 places above our average. Education, about 10. Scientific and technical articles per dollar of GDP, also about 10. So we're punching above our weight on some very interesting measures. But you've been to enough presentations to know there's a but. And the but is that lots of areas that would contribute to our ability to innovate in our economy, in our society, are not where they ought to be. So if we look at our proportion, our ranking on graduates in science and engineering, R&D financed by business, lots of other things, we're between 40 and almost 100 places behind our average ranking on some of the things that you would expect on the benefit and implementation end of the spectrum that I showed you. In aggregate then, my quick whip through the data suggests we're very good at knowledge creation. This is giving us the opportunity to be innovative in the way that we manage society, in the way that we manage business, in the way that we grow our economy. We're not as good on knowledge impact, and we're even less good, if you forgive me, on knowledge diffusion and the way that things are shared. So there's a lot to focus on if we're going to achieve what I think collectively we'd like to achieve. So I sum it up this way. This end works pretty well. So the myth we tell ourselves, or the story in part of our national psyche about the rugged inventor banging away in a shed, it's actually true. We are a highly inventive group of people. We're not as good at translation, implementation, and so forth. Those things don't work as well as they might. So we're missing opportunity that we would otherwise be able to enjoy. So why not? Well, I spent a number of years in a different portion of my career as a venture capital investor. And at its essence, when you invest as a VC, you make a decision about a particular opportunity that's roughly made up of three parts. How good is the technology? How defendable is it? How competitive is it versus anything else? That's a third. How attractive is the market? Is it enormous? And there are no key players yet. And so someday someone could be fabulously wealthy as a result of pursuing that market. That's the second one. And the third one is, who are these people you're dealing with? Have they done this before? Do they understand the challenges they're going to be facing? Do they know what it's like to get up every day wondering, am I going to get my technology or my idea far enough today that I can pay my staff tomorrow? Okay. It really focuses the mind. I've been in a startup, and I know what it's like to have fewer than a couple of months of payroll left in the bank. What are we going to do? We are not finished yet. We're not in the market. We've got this great opportunity still ahead of us, and we can't meet the bills. Got to do something. Got to raise money. Got to do something. Okay. Nothing focuses you, I would argue, more sharply than being in a position like that. Okay. And so we've got to look at all three of those when we are making a decision. Have these people got the legs that we need? Are they open to the personal transformation and challenge they're going to go to make the difference they aspire to make? And if any of those three don't stack up, we wouldn't have made the investment. Right? Now, what a normal VC benefits from is that they are hugely spoiled for choice. I was part of a nearly $300 million U.S. venture fund. We saw 15 to 20 new companies every week per year, so almost 1,000 a year. Per year, we would make about 10 investments. And you knew that you could pass on one where you weren't sure what the answer was, because tomorrow there was going to be another one. And it might be just as good or better. And so we've got to get into the same situation as a nation where there is so much fantastic opportunity. We could be selected to take the very small number of real superstars and pursue them. Right. So what do we do to navigate all the opportunities that we have in the university, and how have we partnered with MB to address that? And one way is the group called Return on Science. Now, Return on Science is part of the Commercialization Partners Network. Keston, is that correct? It is focused on bringing new research to market from all these different sources. It's built on something that we were doing internally, but the support from INBI allows us to make it available to everyone else. And we do so. So this is about looking at opportunities in a very specific way and using a process I'll take you through in a moment. But just in the last year alone, in addition to our opportunities, we've evaluated over 70 projects from essentially everybody else. 14 universities and Crown Research Institutes across New Zealand, some government agencies, and 2 private companies have put their opportunities through the system and taken advantage of the access. It's built around 4 sector-specific investment committees listed up here. And they're made up of people other than the people on my staff. We already know what we know. What's actually really important to making a top quality decision is finding out as much as we can about the opinions that others have. So we leverage a very high degree of independence and of people who have specific skills and experience that we just wouldn't have the benefit of. So they're serial investors. They're people with expertise from the industry that's important for a particular group. Some of them are specialists in commercializing things. Some are serial entrepreneurs. They've gone and created 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 companies, and they know exactly what it takes to get through there. And they are a huge asset to us in advising principally young people who are trying to find out for themselves whether they've got what it takes. And some academics and some market experts and so forth. When an idea enters the return on science process, and I know this is a bit of an eye chart and I'm not going to talk about all of it, but when an idea enters, it gets paired up with a commercialization manager who shepherds that opportunity through this process. It's a fairly normal stage gate process, and at each gate we're asking essentially the same kinds of questions. What is this about? How does it stack up with other things? What does the market look like? How are the people coming along? Does it still pass muster? At the beginning, the answers to those questions are not very deep and not very sophisticated. But the committee will advise us to say, we think the next thing to work out is the freedom to operate position of the intellectual property. So we put up a bit of money to go answer that question. And they come back and say, okay, we know what our FDO position is. It's time to build our proof of concept, prototype, whatever it is, and so forth. And we say, how much is that going to take? How long is that going to take? How much is it going to cost, etc. If it still stacks up, it goes to the next stage, and so forth. In normal pipeline metrics, then, just for your info, we have a kill rate of about 50% per gate. So last year we had 128 of our assets enter this process. 59 went to stage 2, 32 went to the next stage. I think 11 or 12 came out the far end. And that's about right, in my opinion. Some things aren't ready for prime time. Some people aren't ready for prime time. Sometimes competitors do something that we then find out about and we say, it looked beautiful, except Google has the idea now, and we can't compete with Google, or whatever it is. Okay? I want to stop right here because Anna asked me something at the beginning and then I don't think we did it. If I'm using language you don't understand or you have a question, please stop me. Yes?
How long does this process take from start to end on average?
Well, unfortunately, there is no average. And the reason is a pharmaceutical opportunity might take 2 or 3 years. An ICT one might take 2 or 3 months. It's never weeks. If there's an average, I'd say it's probably 6 months to get through. Thank you for the question. The second instrument that we use to help us with this, so NBIE is supporting us being able to make this available to all comers. The second instrument that we have from government is the Pre-Seed Accelerator funding that we have. And that's money to be used for early stage commercialization activities. I hate these. So it's a matching fund situation. It's been devolved to the University of Auckland, the portion that we have to use, which turns out to be quite important that it's devolved. It's meant to be matched 1-to-1. We have so much good stuff going on, we match it more than 3-to-1. Because if we just matched the government's contribution, we wouldn't get enough stuff through our pipeline. Okay? So we'd love it if MB could match us. Because there's still more to do. Yes?
On the front end, you mentioned a little bit, but who's entering triage? So researchers, students, business researchers, et cetera, and maybe all of them.
Yeah, all of the above.
And
yes.
the balance across that, well, maybe you'll get to this later, is about right. You want more of some, less of others, or more of everything?
No, more of everything.
More of everything.
Yeah, more of everything. We've got a couple of pinch points. One pinch point is the dollars.
Yeah.
Second pinch point is actually the commercialization managers, because we work I've got a team of people who work alongside whoever is bringing it along to say, cool idea. This is how we need to articulate what it's about. This is how we need to articulate what stage it is now, all that sort of stuff, and they help them do that, and there are only so many of those.
So that building that capability might be quite important over time as
I
well.
think it
More
will
of them and deepening it.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Right. I mentioned a little bit about numbers. Again, I'm not going to take you through all of this, but here's the evidence. Since 2010, we've invested alongside PSAF about $17 million doing this, not counting the cost of running the process. That's capital deployed, investing in university assets. And it's returned real returns of nearly $70 million on that 17. There's a lot of other potential returns in terms of the capital value and appreciation of the assets that we've invested in and all that stuff. That's not in that number.
But that's not really very accurate. I mean, there's a lot of research which has gone into the elements of that commercialization impact. So what the added value that Uniservice has done would be a different figure.
I'm just talking about the return on what we've spent to get it from where it started to there. I'm not talking about the total value. I absolutely agree with you. Except a fair fraction of the things that we work up do not come from research spending by anyone. Some are absolutely brand new ideas.
Yeah.
One of which is an idea that's not in the field the person was working in.
Yeah.
So where does that come from? But your point's absolutely correct. I'm just talking about deployed a certain amount of capital, shifting something from here to where an opportunity may be able to be realized from it, and the economics of that are here. Exactly to your point, the road to making a difference to business or society is really, really long. So my little stage gate thing is just this little bit. And if I drew this really accurately, of course, there's potentially a giant and long R&D phase as well. But there are lots of things that need to happen afterwards as well, okay? And that involves somebody else's investment or somebody else's effort. If it's a societal benefit, it's beyond our hands at that point, and it's moved on to have a life of its own. And we sometimes forget that as well. So sometimes I get asked, well, if we spend $1 in R&D, it's going to have this much benefit to society, and we've already spent the $1, so where's the benefit? Well, actually, where's the 100 million more that might be required to get that medicine into a physician's hands? It's got to come from somewhere, and it didn't come from the R&D dollar. And you've seen how few dollars I have available to me. It's not really a large number. Okay. So there's the road to success is long. That's the point, and none of us can really predict where it leads. Okay. Let me talk about a commercial example of this that many of you may be familiar with, and something that we are very proud of and we've talked about a good deal. So bear with me on that. And then I have an example of innovation leading to a benefit in society as well. So, wireless power transfer. The idea essentially was to use what was already known, which is that if you have current passing through a circuit and you have another unconnected circuit nearby, power that flows through that first circuit can be transferred to the other circuit. Now, and what that would allow you to do is get rid of all the chargers, connectors, all that other stuff that we use in lots of different places in our personal lives as well as in industry and so forth. The problem was that it needed to be made practical. So this was an effect that was known, but nobody knew how to make it useful. Not really. So it had to be able, power has to be able to cross a substantial gap for it to be commercially relevant. It needs to be able to tolerate a bit of misalignment in the way that the power is transferred across that gap. And if the cat walks through, it needs to not fry the cat. So it's got to be safe. It's got to be fit for the real world. It's got to actually work. So these two characters, Grant Kovic on the left, John Boyce on the right, and I think you know the man in the middle, set out to see if they could make it actually work. And what resulted is a whole heap of new intellectual property and opportunity in wireless power transfer / inductive power transfer. And it won them the Prime Minister's Premier Science Awards last year. Now, big challenge before we get into what they actually did is, it's one of these for our economy. There was no sector, and it was extremely difficult to convince anybody that work ought to be done over here and dollars ought to be spent, because it was out of left field. So here are John and Grant talking about it a little bit.
So we've pioneered wireless power transfer. What it enables is power to be transferred across large new gaps at high efficiency for lots of applications. And the latest and greatest of these is electric vehicle charging and power on move. Going to a wireless world is something we're all looking for. Really where the nutshell and the excitement is in somebody's home, in applications that we use every day. And so we're starting to see this proliferate into handheld devices, but actually into vehicles, and making it possible for people to accept the technology because it's easy and it's intuitive.
When we started doing this, everyone
So it's in the field and then out of the field. That's why the light goes on and off.
And the only people who would give us money were uni services. All the other funding agencies weren't interested. It was too risky to even consider. We made a model system and we showed it to 26 different companies. People were one of them said, wow, we really like this, we'll go with it.
All right, so that's the system. That's what our initial money after triage, where we said, we think this is a good idea, we need to build a prototype, that's what it did. So that people could see the opportunity and say, you can do this actually quite quickly, and you can do it on the move, which turns out to be very interesting. Now, let me get back to my presentation. So, John and Grant had the idea and began building the estate. We put in the money because no public good agency would support it. They said, don't have an industry today, don't understand it, not sure it'll work, don't want it. That led to the opportunity to license the prototype technology to a company that makes machines that move materials around in factories. And they paid us a license fee for access to the IP. That money was plowed into the next demonstration that it could work, which was with this company working on heavy vehicles like buses. So I think you should replace the trolley buses in Wellington with dynamic wireless charged electric vehicles, personally. And that generated some more fees that came in that allowed us to develop wireless connections for things like the lights along roadways and other places where they're in harsh conditions. You have to hardwire these things together, and then a car drives over it and the light doesn't work. It doesn't matter. The light and the wire have to be half a meter apart from each other, and it still works. Which allowed us to then develop some more for low power usages in consumer electronics kinds of applications and others. This is now in a company in Auckland called Power by Proxy. They have 85 engineers they've hired to work on carrying this forward, and one of these days they'll be a public company. We hope all of us can get rid of the cords where we charge our cell phones and all that stuff, and you charge it wireless. The car opportunity, nobody in the car industry would quite accept that this was a real practical opportunity for cars. So we created a spin-out company called Halo IPT, and Halo built the first cars with the charging systems in it, and then Qualcomm rocked up and said, we'll have that, thanks, and they bought the company. And there are more fields yet to explore. Last year alone, Grant and John came up with invention disclosures for 18 new patents in a single quarter of the year. So they're very busy guys. And just to show it's not just a drawing or a prototype in the lab, these are the cars.
Where we're going, we don't need wires.
So the thing is, you live in a lovely house on a terrace street with only on-street parking, and you want an electric car, and you go, well, I can't have an electric car because I can't plug it in, I can't have a wire draping out the bedroom window and plugged into the car, because Mrs. Wiggins next door, she's going to catch a neck in it, and it's going to be awful. Of course you can't. Well, this thing that I'm standing on is not actually cooking my feet. This is an inductive charging plate. This can be set into the road, not even into the road, under the road, and it will charge your car when you park over the top of it. It's absolutely amazing. This is called wireless charging, inductive charging, and I've come along here today to find out all about it.
The future of electric vehicles is exciting, and how electric vehicles are charged in the future will be key to their success and growth. With stationary wireless electric vehicle charging, you simply park as you would normally and charge up. Once parked in a charging bay, charging is initiated and power is transferred wirelessly from a ground-based charging pad to a similar pad on the electric vehicle.
So, you could do it that way, or even in discussions with Lord Drayson in the UK, who's behind the Formula E automobile racing group, to have wireless pads in the turns for a race course, because the car is going most slowly then, and they pick up power every time they go through a corner. They never have to stop for fuel. So, very exciting stuff and loads of fun if you're a petrol-head or at least a gearhead like I am. Right, I want to move now to a societal benefit and help you see that innovation contributes in exactly the same way. And the definition still holds. This is about doing something different that has a benefit, that makes a difference. So in this case, we know that we have a problem with depression and anxiety in young people in New Zealand, right? So the idea was to create a more effective way to help young people manage these issues, mild to moderate anxiety and depression. Because the problem is that we know the kids have these challenges, but 75% of them who should be treated will not seek help. That means they have family issues, they have relationship issues, they fall behind in school. Potentially lifelong effects are experienced by these young people because there's not an effective way to help them deal with the issue that they have. And what help is available, typically they don't seek. So, the solution was to go where the kids are. And that was to develop an online gaming solution to deliver cognitive behavior therapy approaches, the same treatment they would receive if they went to see a doctor. But they won't go to the doctor. So, self-help through e-therapy is the idea, and the solution is to build it into a game. It helps them understand better how to solve their problems, how to deal with anxiety, how to promote the way that they think, develop their social skills, and to just deal with the pressure that they're under. They can do it in the privacy of their bedrooms or whatever. No one has to know that they've been seeking some help. Again, the Prime Minister has shown significant interest in this. Part of his initiative for mental health for young people supported the development and launch of Sparks, and he came to our medical school to do just that. Right, so here's a bit about Sparks.
I think sometimes we need to be really aware that young people need tools and pathways and steps to get through problems that maybe we take for granted as part of growing up, but for them they're big issues. So Sparks gives them a practical way to go through those steps, and I think if they can do that, then they'll be much more resilient about problems they're going to face in life.
What I think is really great about the game is that it takes what may seem like really huge and impossible problems and breaks them down for you into small steps you can take and makes finding a solution super cheap.
Sparks came about following a conversation that I had with a good friend of mine who's a gym practitioner. What we've realised over the last couple of decades is that depression is very common in the community, and it starts in mid-adolescence with rates climbing very steeply between the ages of 15 and 18. And we also know that about 3/4 of young people who suffer from low mood during this time never get any help for this. And she and I were talking about how we might change that, and she said to me, I think you should put cognitive behavioural therapy onto a CD-ROM so that I can run it into my general practice. And that kind of set the scene, and here we are 10 years later with Sparks Online.
Hi there, Mike. Welcome to Sparks.
Sparks is an online self-help tool. It uses a fantasy game format, so the idea is to try and get help across using techniques that we usually use in therapy, using a fantasy game format so you can choose an avatar and go into a fantasy world and undertake a number of challenges.
My brief was to develop something quite interactive for young people that was different from the other e-therapy tools out there. We knew we wanted to make it interactive, animated and quite fun.
One of the challenges with creating Sparks was that we needed to make sure that it was applicable to Māori young people. So we wanted to ensure that there was characters within the game that not only spoke some reo, but they also had perhaps a Māori accent.
We've tested Sparks in a clinical trial and we've shown that it's very effective. It's as good as the sort of treatment that young people usually get in face-to-face counselling, and it's also been very popular both with young people, but we've also had a lot of international attention about it.
So there's much more to the video. I didn't think you needed to see the whole thing. And the point here is the same that I've made about the commercial opportunities. This arose by thinking differently about a problem, by not being willing to accept that the status quo was necessarily the right answer, and then bringing together some creative minds to do that different thing and see if it would work. Sally Mary mentioned that the program has been through a randomized clinical trial. It's as effective as a normal course of face-to-face therapy for young people with anxiety and mild to moderate depression. But the most important thing about it is in the first month, more than 1,000 kids who are not currently seeking treatment signed up and have entered into the Spark program, and many more thousands have since we launched this back in May. So it's already, we think, making the kind of difference that we hoped it would make. So back to my main points then. The road to success is very long. I do think there's a significant contribution from government to make all of this possible. Clearly support for education, support for research and development. Much of it, I think, should be investigator-led because none of us can predict what those new sectors might be. We wouldn't have a John and Grant if there weren't people who wanted to think a new thought. We have the Return on Science program and the Pre-Seed Accelerator program that help us not only accelerate what we do and the impact that we can have, but also to make part of what we've built available to others, and we think that's very important. Obviously, there are ongoing investments in development and things like incubators. We focus both on the opportunity side, but also on the talent side of the equation that I was talking about earlier, and there are lots of other instruments. They all contribute. They're all quite important. We all still, though, have a big issue in New Zealand. If we look at our rankings in the world and what we experience every day if we're in this field, in that getting from here to realizing whatever benefit we're aiming for is hard and it takes a long time. And it takes a lot of people to be able to accomplish it. Thanks very much. Appreciate your attention.
We've got some questions down in. We've got tea and coffee afterwards. There's any questions you'd like to get to us?
That's someone back there.
We've also got a box of national statement of science investments by the door. If you want to put one.
I have one to get rid of.
Have a read and let us know what you think.
Yes. Yes.
Can you elaborate on what you meant by pre-revenue and pre-earnings? Are they promised earnings or potential earnings, or what are they? Pre-revenue and pre-earnings.
So the question is, what does pre-revenue and pre-earnings mean? It simply means the stage of development of the company. So you create it to eventually be creating wealth. That's what the company is there for. But in early stages of its life, it's probably making losses rather than gains. So it's not yet a company that's in earnings. And if it's even earlier, it doesn't have anything to sell yet. So it's not making any revenues. So if you've got the business plan laid out of what you think that company is going to do, it says we're going to invest in getting ready to start selling something, and that's its pre-revenue phase. It starts selling something, but it's not making enough to pay all of its costs. So that's a pre-earnings company, and eventually it's selling enough, it's covering its costs, and it's making, there's something left over at the end of each month. That's all I mean by that.
So, what are the commercialization challenges in a innovation for societal benefit? It's so diffused in terms of capture. The example, the second example.
Well, capture is an interesting thing. It's sometimes easier to measure than to capture. I would argue that kids are already using Sparks, and we think enjoying the benefit of experiencing therapy is already a benefit. So the number of kids involved is part of the measure of success there.
I'm talking about the revenue capture rather than the revenue capture.
Well, that one's not for revenue capture. There's no intention to capture revenue from it. We have done a little bit of interesting stuff around it in that an overseas party wanted to have access to Sparks. And we said, we're happy to provide you access, but we need something back for the investment that's gone into the research and for the effort that we've put into getting it out there. And they want to take Sparks from online and make it available on portable devices. So it's on your smartphone and so forth, which we don't have the money to pay for. So the exchange of value there is we've given a US company the right to port it onto mobile devices in exchange for making it available to Kiwis on mobile devices for free in perpetuity. So there's the return to say, instead of more millions spent on it, we don't have to spend those things. Someone else will, and we get the benefit for Kiwis. Yes?
How do you look
Can you say that a little louder? I'm sorry.
How do you work alongside Callahan Innovation with the work you do?
Callahan at many touch points. Obviously, Callahan's involved in incubators. Incubators are a place that some of our opportunities might go when they leave our hands. They don't have to, but they could do, so that's one way. In our commercial research portfolio, there are a lot of touch points between us and Callahan because we're talking to the same companies. Sometimes they refer opportunities to us. They say, company X is looking for skills in bioengineering or something. Talk to these guys at Auckland, etc. Also, some of the things after they've left our hands become recipients of the Callahan type R&D, business R&D grants. So, lots of different places. Yes?
So how many of your existing clients are already, or existing small companies, are most of them really startups?
Clients for the totality of uni services? No, they're every kind. There's not a mostly, to be honest. We do, we create in about 1,000 new research projects a year, and they're from anything from SMEs to my old mates at Fonterra and everything in between. So there's no real pattern. I would observe, though, that it can be challenging to do really hardcore work with the really small companies if they're not technology companies. And the reason is they have a relatively poor ability to articulate their need in a way that we can act on. And if we solve something for their need, they have a relatively poor absorptive capacity to take things up, which is one of the things that we talk about with Callahan quite extensively. How can you help small companies be better at defining what would make them great? And how can you help them bring IP and technology in because they're not typically very sophisticated?
And
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I was going to pick up real quickly on that, just on that absorptive capacity question. If the firms you're working with, small or large, is it your opinion that they do have the requisite absorptive capacity to work with you in a way that is going to derive that future benefit, or is that an issue across New Zealand?
It's an issue across New Zealand. You know, we're a nation of small businesses, and we work with a tiny fraction of the total. And I'm sure the ones we work with are the ones who have some, because they wouldn't spend money knowing they couldn't really get the benefit anyway. You know. So yes.
Going back to that issue that you just described about small startup companies, why did you exclude technology firms from that?
Because they typically do have good ability to articulate their need, and they often have excellent absorptive capacity. So they're more like a big company, right? So they go, I've only got 5 employees, but 4 of them are engineers, and they know what they need. Please deliver it because we're waiting for that. We've got to have it for what we're doing. So you can work with them very easily. It's the 5 guys who are running a milk powder dryer. That's not so easy. Nothing against milk. Sorry. Yes.
So I mean, what portion of the spin-out firms would be driven out of the university by the academics versus plucked out by external entrepreneurs?
Well, I think, let me first make a comment, and that is that we're not in the business of creating spin-outs. We create a spin-out when there is no credible licensee for technology we're commercializing. Okay? So we don't set out to say, I'm going to start a company. So last year we did 50 plus licenses, 52 I think, and we created 3 companies. So we could have done 55 companies if there were enough people around, which there aren't. There aren't anywhere near that many entrepreneurs in New Zealand, no good ones. So, so that's the first point. Then what constitutes a startup when we start one?
No, what portion of these startups that are sent out of the organization, are they driven by the academic or actually pushed by an entrepreneur instead?
Well, yes is the answer. Both. I mean, you can't have a credible technology company without at least access to the inventors. Some inventors think they're going to be CEOs. A very, very small proportion actually can be, but a few can. So the sweet spot for us is Chief Technical Officer, Chief Scientific Officer, or Chair of the Scientific Advisory Board is where we want the inventor to be. And then we have to have, if possible, a second or third time entrepreneur to lead the company. Because at least we can rely on them. They're going to make mistakes, but not the ones they made the first time. Far, far better to have a seasoned person. So those are critically short supply. The other thing that I'll mention is critically short supply in this country, in my opinion, is governance talent for high intellectual property content startup companies. So there are plenty of people who are experienced boards of director level people for big companies. What a 5-person IP-rich startup requires in terms of steering from the board, totally different than what telecom is. And there are almost none of those. Now, sorry, but I saw someone over here. Yes?
So I was going to ask a question about the other side in terms of the scientists.
Yeah.
I suspect there are a lot of, you talked about these 2 guys who came up with
Yeah.
a great idea. There are a lot of other scientists who maybe could come up with great ideas, but it's not really in their minds to think about what their skills and knowledge, what it could apply to. So do you have any thoughts about structures or programs or incentives that could increase the extent to which the scientists are actually thinking about that?
Yes, good question. We run a series of workshops each year focused exactly on that. So we talk in each of the faculties at Auckland, there's a person who's the associate dean for research. And they're the person who's supposed to know all the major research themes going on across medicine or engineering or science or whatever. And they know who the people are doing the interesting things are. And they introduce us and say, you might want to talk and see whether there's an interest. If there is an interest, we go into a room like this somewhere, and we spend a day or two with them talking about what the opportunities could be. People like John and Grant come and say, I never knew anything about this, but then this happened, and then I did that. And now, in their case, they've got several $1 million in a university account that they can spend on pursuing the research questions that interest them. They don't have to ask anybody for permission to what they do. For real academics, they are in the best place they could be in their lives. They're a self-endowed research institute. And so we try to help people who've got an open mind realize that there's a broader way of defining success in an academic career than only teaching and scholarly publication. Now, the stars in our organization do all of those things extremely well. Yeah, but yes, we do exactly that. I'm sorry, I was here next. Yes?
It had some similarities to the previous one, but are academics getting better at recognizing the importance of patenting and intellectual property protection? Recently heard about one academic who actively blocked because wanted rather to publish than to patent.
Yes. In general, they are. In fact, as a nation, we are. I first came to New Zealand to live in the mid-90s, and then it was still common to hear on the evening news, first time somebody had done something in my field, molecular developmental biology, first time it's been done by a Kiwi scientist. Who cares? First time it's been done is important. First time it's been repeated, maybe 10-year-old work that's been repeated by a Kiwi scientist. Why is that on the news? We don't hear that anymore. What we hear now is scientific breakthrough by a New Zealander. It's a real scientific breakthrough. So the level of sophistication right across the country is far, far higher than it was nearly 20 years ago. There's always a tension between publishing and pursuing commercial benefit. And it's a willing buyer, willing selling kind of interaction for us. Yes?
With your wireless charging example, you sort of gave a timeline of how they started with robots in factories, which you hazard a guess there's not many people around, so it can fail a bit more, and eventually moved on to cars. Did they start out by saying, right, we're going to try something small and see where that leads, or they said, right, we're going to go for cars in 5 or 10 years' time, and we need to work back from that in order to make the car people believe it, or was it a combination?
It was a combination. It was when John said when we showed it to 26 companies, one of them was Daifuku, one of them was conducted Longfleur, one of them was Qualcomm, one of them was BMW, et cetera, et cetera. The car manufacturers said, we have such a complex job of developing a car. Until this is has an engineering standard, and until all the other manufacturers have agreed this is the way charging is going to happen, we can have a plug that, in a post along the street and plug into that. Nobody likes it, particularly when it's raining. It's a bit scary. But it works, right? Until that happens, we're not interested. So Qualcomm said the opportunity for us is to buy it and then push an international common standard so that every car who has it has the same. So that's, who's ready for uptake, who's been looking forward all their lives, where have you been all my life, that sort of thing. All answers. Now over here, yes?
This goes back to the questions a little while ago. When you were talking about how many of your projects get through your stages and your cases, so you started with 128 and got about 10% out the other end.
Yes.
Then it goes to pre-earnings, pre-revenue, pre-earnings, How many of your 10% then reach profit?
Well, if it's remember it only goes pre-revenue and all that jazz if it's a spin-out.
Right.
When it comes out of our funnel, it could go straight to a license to Xero. And Xero incorporates it and uses it straight away.
Yeah.
Right. So what proportion would we describe as successful?
Well,
is that really what you mean?
Yeah, because you were saying this is the part New Zealand doesn't do well. Okay, so from pre-revenue through to good success.
Mm-hmm.
Your pipeline, is that almost assuring that 10% that make it through your pipeline are going to be a good success?
No. Just like the government interventions that change the odds, what we're doing is changing the odds. So if we didn't have all those people opining about what ought to happen next and putting the scrutiny over it and stuff, we might have attempted all 128, and but 5 might work, right? We're winnowing down to the 10 or 12, out of which 5 are going to work, right? And we have a much better idea about the nature of those 5 than if we just said, here are 128, fail everywhere, oh, one's still standing. It's essentially the other way to do it, right? The problem with that way is that we only have 5 commercialization managers. I've only got a handful of millions each year. If I tried to do everything with 128, I probably wouldn't get any, because I'd need much more money. It'd be very wasteful, is my point. I'd need a lot more money and a lot more people engaged to get to my 5. For a VC, all you ever care about is 1 in 10 succeeding. 1 in 10 usually pays back the fund, right? So the jargon is you've got the ones that you need to kill straight away, and then walking wounded, kind of in the middle. They might be perfectly fine business, but they don't pay back what you expected to receive, and 1 pays back the 300 million or whatever the size of your fund is. That's pretty normal. Yes?
Questions about the institutional arrangement of uni services being affiliated with University of Auckland.
Yes.
Do you have similar services for other major universities in New Zealand, or you provide the services for other universities?
We provide access to the Return on Science investment committees to anyone who wants to have access. So they can say, here's my brief for triage stage, will you consider it please? And we'll say, looks like ICT goes there, right? And the committee will say, we think you should not do it, or we think you should do it, and this needs to happen next, and blah, 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 and we think it's going to cost about that. We don't then pay for that. Their institution, or if they're a private company, they have to reach in their pockets to pay for it, but we'll tell them what we think they ought to do, right? We provide no other services to anyone else. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of the University of Auckland.
If I could start, so every university has a commercialisation arm. Uni Services is quite a huge country mile the largest.
Yes, but there's none that's set up like we are though, right? They're all cost centers within the organization, so they just get a central budget allocation. They're typically fairly small. If there was something to do, they can't invest in it, right? So the magic really of what we do is we've got a large business that throws off free cash flows. And my owner allows me to invest those free cash flows into developing, commercializing IP instead of giving it to the central fund. That's what it's about. Yes?
The substantial economies of scale in building up this sort of process, so
sure.
It's probably only KiwiNet does it on a wider range of institutions, but Uni Services is probably the only one that could do it for a particular university.
Yeah, I agree with that. They have a critical difference, KiwiNet, in that they don't have the high reliance on independence that we have. So it's typically the commercialization manager of each of the member institutions, which is not a bad thing, but it's not the same thing. So many of those 70 that we've done are KiwiNet member referrals. Yes?
I'm quite interested in the ones that fail, and possibly even preceding those, the ones that you're training up to consider to fail or become successful. And my assumption would be for New Zealand, and especially as it relates to, let's say, technology entrepreneurs or technologists working with entrepreneurs, the human capital acquisition of going through even the failure process and the culture of entrepreneurial spirit and talent and perseverance and so forth is quite a valuable thing.
It is.
And do we capture that in any way? And what role does the University of Auckland, especially if it relates to students, think about you and all of these quote-unquote failures as actually quite a positive thing as it relates to graduate attributes and opportunities to be successful in life and business or otherwise?
We do definitely capture it in the sense that the people who fail for the right reasons we want to see again. And so they get lots of love and encouragement. And frankly, if something fails, typically what that means is that the market isn't there, or we're not able to do what we thought we could do, which means the best thing for that is to publish it and share it in a different way, and we encourage people to go and publish if it doesn't happen. So for them, it's not a failure. It adds to it's just a different outcome than what we were targeting. And if they've learned and they are a more eager participant the next time, and the next one is better, then it's not a failure for us either. So we think it's absolutely the right thing to do. And in my venture days, we said no 990 times a year. And we always said no very politely, because we didn't know how many times we were going to be wrong in saying no, and we didn't know when we were going to see them again. Right? So they might get over a hurdle we didn't think they could get over, and then they come to the fund again, and we say, fantastic, love to see you. And they only come back because we were nice to them when we said no.
And the university itself, through all the different faculty and teaching and learning, everything that's going, it is feeding into you much more than it once did.
Oh yeah, it is. But there's still a long way to go. I mean, we sponsor the business schools business planning competition and other things, and Powered by Proxy was the first winner of that business planning competition 10 years ago. And what our university is focused on is turning people who have technology facility of some sort into business people, or at least business friendly, rather than going the other direction, because it's the easier direction. My own story, I was a medical school faculty member doing completely non-commercial research, and that's what I thought I would spend my life doing, until I discovered entrepreneurship myself and was part of a startup company that we took through an IPO. So, and that, not easy, but it was easier than teaching somebody molecular medicine who was a BCom. That's hard, really hard. Question? Oh, sorry. Yes.
Can high-tech businesses succeed in New Zealand? And I preface that with a comment with a view that we should be building off of our comparative advantage: wind, rain, weather, cows, grass, weather. And so there's a sort of unwritten understanding that we have no competitive advantages, if you like, for these businesses. And that somebody overseas does, and they'll be better at it, and so why should we bother?
Well, how long have you got? I spent 9 years in Fonterra as the CSO, acquiring technologies for the company. So the food industry is actually a very technology-intensive industry. And so there's not really part of your contrast is artificial, I think. Obviously, they could use some more technology sometimes, but I was gone by then, so nothing to do with it. Look, it's largely driven by where the market is. So some markets are so distributed, it doesn't actually matter where in the world you are, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be as good as anyone. Why is Xero doing well? They're a cloud-based solution for businesses, and who knows, where the cloud touches, and does it make any difference? No, it doesn't make the least bit of difference. Probably needs salespeople and your relationship people in the market where you're selling. Core of your company and the development of new stuff doesn't make any difference. So, is this a place to attract the kind of talent that will build the next generation of Xero? If it is, perfect place for it to be. Lots of other things like that, I think, are available to us here. We have a very high-quality education system. We have a corruption-free system of government. We have a strong currency and some other stuff. those are advantages. But they need to be matched to where the opportunity also is. So I don't think there's for me, there's not a simple answer to your question. One of my directors ran a specialty pharmaceutical company. The rest of the company was in Massachusetts in the States, but he and the senior management team were here because they preferred to live here. And it worked fine. So that's the closest to proper drug development in New Zealand that we'll probably do. And that's because the road is long and it's phenomenally expensive. 700-800 million US for each approved drug. And we just don't have the capital. Oh, I see. Yes?
Do you think it's easier to make an academic entrepreneur than a small, medium business which isn't R&D intensive? What's the easiest way forward, basically?
Yeah. Okay, easier way forward. The objection I would raise is make. There's no make. Help, not make. So if someone wants to go down a new path, we can help them. But they have to want to go down that path. Yes?
Last month I heard a talk similar to yours from the lady from Stanford University about their commercialization.
Okay. Yeah.
In setting up uni services and as you continue to develop and grow, do you look to the big boys for influence and lessons?
Sure. Yes. And interestingly, they look to us. I went to the autumn meeting, which is the Association of University Technology Managers, which I confessed before I took this job I didn't know existed, but it does. And it's all the majors around the world. And quite a few people wanted to talk to me about uni services and how we managed to do what we're doing. Because almost none are independent companies. Almost all are departments of their university. So my counterpart at Emory was here recently because we're working on a deal together. Except that he's got an office of 10 people in a much larger university than ours. And he has to go to his vice chancellor every year for budget allocation to keep the lights on and stuff. And all of they never see any of their returns. Now, my people have the same kind of, at least intellectual and emotional connection to what they're doing as if we were fully independent. You get a licensing deal done, it's your deal. It's not an assignment that you had that you carry out. And that's hugely motivational and important to us. Yes?
Actually, that raises a point that I can't remember that you specifically said. How do you gain a return from what you do? Do you provide a service charge, or do you take a position, a capital position in some of the startups that are going
on the intellectual property activities? The way it works is by the employment agreement that academics and professional staff at the university have. The intellectual property is the property of the university. That has been deeded to uni services. So we are the beneficial owner of the university's intellectual property. We share that with the inventors and the departments in recognition of the past investment that's gone into it, et cetera, et cetera. And then in each deal, we participate in the returns.
Yeah.
So that's how we do it.
So
yes.
You're the ones who assigned John and
John and Grant.
John and Grant, you gave them their millions. Uni Services said, okay, you can have that portion and play with it as you will.
Yes. Now, that was available to them personally, and they chose to put it into a university account to run their labs off of, which they've done with the proceeds of the Prime Minister's Prize as well. And they've said, I have a nice life, that's fine. I'd like to be able to do my work with not be accountable to anyone ever. And we said, great, go for your life.
How common is that?
Not as common as we'd like to make it, actually. But it is actually very common. There's a cancer researcher, a very famous one at Auckland Medical School, and all of the proceeds of his work that come from commercial things, he does the same thing with. So he's got twice the size of a research group than he would otherwise have. because he's made a donation to himself.
But some of the money goes back to the department.
It does.
So it's sort of, what, a third to the university, a third to the department.
That's
a
the
third to
standard deal,
individual.
yes.
So that third to the individual gets there, then also donating to the department effectively.
Yeah. Well, he's donated, they've each donated it to a targeted account for their research programs. And the part that goes to the department pays for postdoctoral fellows and scholarships and new equipment for the department and all kinds of things. So it's, you know, everybody benefits, in my opinion.
How many people get to that stage where they've made it, and then say, right,
Well, again,
I've had enough, I've got the boat, I've got the batch, I've got the BMW, I'm done, I'm New Zealand rich, I don't want to go take over the world.
Relatively few, relatively few. But we've made some graduate students millionaires. So, you know, it's possible to do. You know, a good success is enough of a return that they get a benefit beyond just participating and feeling good about it. And we have enough to reinvest in the next smart person who comes along. That's the outcome we're looking for. So we're trying to create a sustainable model that allows us to do this as long as there are great ideas arising out of our university. That's our objective. If I wanted to be rich, I'd do something else.
Do you know at the University of Auckland the greater proportion of new ideas coming from postdocs or senior researchers, or is there any because there was a concern that there was some reduced funding for postdocs in New Zealand 2 years ago, and I don't know whether it's been rectifying the whole stuff.
It's really hard to deconvolute that from generational and attitudinal progress. So I've got examples all over the map. The medical professor is 72 years old. John Boyes is same age range. So, you know, they're full professors and have been forever, and they're both basically emeriti. We have some first-year graduate students who had fascinating ideas and everything in between. I think the openness to a broader definition of one's career is widespread in places like engineering, because what they do is fairly applied anyway. It's much narrower in medicine and a couple of other places. So there are lots of confounding things. I'd say the sweet spot for productivity in an academic career is 30s and 40s. And the same would be true for us in the commercial stuff. About the same.
I think we'll call it at that. On behalf of everyone, I'd just like to say thank you to Andy for travelling to Wellington today. As you've gathered, there's lots of people around who have an interest in your work and how to support more of it in New Zealand. So if you want to carry on talking, stay around for a tea and coffee and some chocolate biscuits.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for your questions.